global warming as a race against time, that it is time to act with urgency and with clear purpose. But are these talks likely to produce anything meaningful?
Well, that's the thing, Tony, isn't it? We've heard these kind of messages before,
Yes.
as I said a little while ago, an urgent call for urgent action urgently. But the point is, you've got to try and persuade 194 nations to be involved. Ban Ki-moon saying the right things. What else can he do to try and get the message across, to abandon apathy, to embrace ambition and so forth? He talked about the crisis that is a threat to us all, that signs are all around us, a real plea for action and a call to arms to take on a sustainable, clean future. Let's talk to Martin Kaiser now. He joins us from Greenpeace International, the main climate policy guy for Greenpeace. Martin, what did you make of what Ban Ki-moon said there? His main thrust was for people to take the long term, wasn't it? And that's what the politicians find it so hard to do.
It was quite interesting that Ban Ki-moon started with that climate change is already impacting the daily life of people around the globe. And on the other hand, he has outlined in a very balanced manner what he expects as an outcome here in Doha.
So we'll take that on a little bit more. That's what he expects, but is it achievable?
I think he mentioned that the Kyoto Protocol is not just important to keep Europe and Norway and Switzerland in a legally binding regime, rather than also to outline what is expected from a new global deal together with the United States, with China and India, and its regulatory framework.
It comes back to this old point that we were discussing this before, but if Russia aren't involved, if Canada aren't involved, if New Zealand aren't involved, the United States didn't even ratify it, China aren't in it, India aren't in it, what good is a Kyoto Protocol?
The signature of the Kyoto Protocol here in Doha, I think, is a precondition for the engagement of the United States, of China, of India, and even Russia in the negotiations of a global deal. Without the second commitment period, it will be Wild West.
So when you look at, you've just heard what he had to say, what Cristina Figueres had to say, the UN climate chief. Are the delegates likely to listen? Are they really likely to take it on board any more than they have done in the past?
What we expect here in Doha is a real fresh air in the corridors, where governments take bold steps in either pledging new financing for climate protection, or they announce strong mitigation targets for the greenhouse gases. We haven't heard that yet, but we hope that ministers and head of states will bring anything on the table which can move this slow process forward.
We're looking to 2015. This is the roadmap that Doha really needs to produce for developing and developed nations to come together and work out a plan that they can all agree on in 2015 that is then implemented in the year 2020. My point is that we've taken 20 years to get not very far already. So what hope is there that in 4 years' time we're going to have any kind of agreement by 2015?
At the moment, there's very little hope. We don't see any world leader who is really engaged and committed to do the homework on mitigating greenhouse gases. And without an industrialized country leading on that, I think it would be very, very difficult to ask more from emerging economies or even developing countries.
All right, Martin, we'll leave it there for the moment. Martin Kaiser from Greenpeace, thank you very much indeed. Interesting view there indeed. Of course, as we've been discussing, the gap between developing and developed nations is far and wide, and they're trying to bring it together. But can they achieve it? Here's Tarek Basley.
It's the world's largest consumer of coal. No surprise then that China's carbon dioxide emissions dwarf those of all other countries. Its fast-growing economy and huge population of 1.4 billion make China central to global efforts to tackle climate change.
We are already taking ambitious actions to reduce emissions. Our mitigation contribution is much greater than that by developed country parties, who have greater historical responsibility and should take the lead in combating climate change.
Under the Kyoto Protocol, China was not obliged to limit its greenhouse gas emissions, but it has promised to reduce what it calls its carbon intensity, the amount of carbon dioxide produced for each unit of economic growth. There's no dispute China is the king of carbon dioxide emissions, but it's using these talks to make the case for a different way of calculating them. carbon dioxide can remain in the environment for centuries, and that's why China says historical emissions are significant and must be factored, and those countries who emitted the most in the past must be the ones who now make the greatest cuts. Cumulative carbon dioxide emissions, calculated from 1850 to 2007, put the United States well out in front. During that period, it produced 3 times as much CO2 as any other country. And China is investing in alternative energy. It's already the world's biggest generator of wind power, and by 2020 it aims to get 15% of its energy from non-carbon sources, among them hydroelectric power from the Three Gorges dams. At this year's climate change talks, China has teamed up with Brazil, India and South Africa.
Some of the biggest economies in the world, the emerging economies in the world that have been growing very quickly, that have large populations, yes, they do have an enormous amount of influence, and that influence, needs ultimately to be wielded in a way which is to the benefit of their populations, many of whom are going to suffer significantly from the impacts of climate change.
As a political and economic force, China is on the rise. Its leaders appear to be increasingly aware that for the sake of its own people, if not the rest of the world, it must play its part in tackling climate change. Tarek Bazley, Al Jazeera, Doha.